You know those games from early life that you were so thoroughly defeated in that you just never touched it again? Like, there's no denying it was a great game, and you liked playing it, but it just couldn't be overcome? This is one of those for me. It's probably my only real white whale, so to speak, a game whose specter has hung over me for decades. And this game is Blaster Master for the NES. Originally known as Metafight in Japan, Blaster Master would receive a localized release in North America circa 1988. It mixes early Metroidvania aspects with run-and-gun gameplay and ties it together with two different vantage points featuring distinctly different gameplay. Let's take a closer look. Blaster Master's split personality is something that made it especially noteworthy in 1988. The first of its two styles is its primary exploration mode. General progress is made utilizing a side-scrolling Metroidvania-style action platforming system infused with heavy run-and-gunning. This is where the iconic Sophia 3 tank got its start, and it packs a lot of features into the confines of the NES controller's limited inputs. Naturally, players move to the left or right using the D-pad, while jumping is handled with the A button. Nothing out of the ordinary there. The Sophia has a powerful cannon that can be fired with the B button. Generally speaking, up to 3 shots can be on screen at once, and the cannon can also be aimed vertically by holding up on the D-pad. This is handy when attacking or defending against enemies above the Sophia, which happens frequently. For enemies below the Sophia, though, the cannon cannot be used, and some enemies are difficult to hit as they are small enough for cannon fire to pass right over them. For these foes, a trio of special weapons can be used. Rockets will fire 3 missiles forward in a linear spread pattern. Lightning will discharge a bolt of electricity below the Sophia, and my personal favorite, homing missiles, will fire out and track various enemies anywhere on the screen. The catch to these weapons is not only are they limited, they also have to be found and collected before they can be used. Each pickup obtained is worth 20 in the stock, so players don't necessarily need to be stingy if they are needed. The Sophia has a shield gauge comprised of 8 segments that represent its hull integrity. If all of the Sophia's armor is depleted, it will explode, resulting in a life lost. However, many defeated enemies will drop recovery items marked with a P that will restore these segments at a rate of 1 per pickup. Flashing P icons will recover 4 at a time. The Sophia's later hover ability also sports a similar gauge which can be recovered with gray and flashing H icons in the same manner. There are also times where players are required to have their pilot, Jason, disembark from the Sophia to enter on-foot areas. He'll leave and enter the Sophia by way of the select button. Jason can also jump with the added ability to duck, crawl, climb ladders, and swim. He can also fire at enemies with a rather weak gun. However, care should be taken, as in a lot of cases Jason will take more damage when hit by the enemies in the exploration mode. And fall damage also applies if he drops from too high a height. Drops from unexpectedly short falls can be fatal, resulting in a life lost. To add even more difficulty to an already hard game, there's even a section where he'll need to tackle a significant portion of a specific area without the protection the Sophia offers him, which is considerably more challenging as a result. Each area the player will traverse in is rather large, and a lot of exploration will be needed for fresh players to learn the best routes for efficient progress. The goal is to locate the stage boss in an effort to defeat it, and in doing so collecting an enhancement for the Sophia. Shot upgrades, a hover module, the dive unit, and wall climbing add-ons are all required to make it to the end of the game. A number of sub-areas can be accessed on foot through small doors by pressing down. These are combat areas that change the perspective into an overhead run-and-gunner, complete with a much more up-close and personal viewpoint. Movement in this mode is 8-directional, and everything is much more detailed, especially Jason and his enemies. While not every of these needs to be explored or conquered, most can actually be skipped completely. One of them in every area will house the area boss, and must be completed to progress. All of the others are sometimes tempting when in search of weapon or health energy, but will often add risk to the player's run if they aren't careful, and with no scoring system in Blaster Master, the non-boss sub-areas are 100% optional. While in combat mode, Jason's life gauge is as expected, and defeating enemies will often drop life recovery items as normal. Jason can also find weapons and energy for the Sophia in these areas as well, which can help in replenishing his tank for the road ahead. Players can fire Jason's gun with the B button as normal, but he cannot jump in these sections. Instead, he can launch an explosive grenade when pressing the A button. Jason's gun in combat is fairly limited and off-shifted to his right side, meaning anything to his left when facing up, or to his right side when facing down will be hard to hit when up against some walls. Grenades are perfect for these situations. Especially with regards to range, Jason's gun actually leaves a bit to be desired, but players can also find power-up items to strengthen its fire from enemies or destructible structures. As his gun gets more and more powerful, its range will extend and its fire pattern will change from linear to an arc to a wave. Its ultimate form is a rippling, rainbow-colored wave cannon that can blast through walls and makes quick work of most enemies. Here's the catch though, if Jason takes damage for any reason whatsoever, his gun level will also be reduced by 1 level. Additionally, all shot patterns are stopped dead in their tracks by walls and indestructibles, with the exception of the ultimate shot type. If the player dies either on foot or in the Sophia, they will also lose all of their gun power. This can make things very challenging for players that haven't quite figured out the finer points to approaching and attacking the enemies and bosses in the overhead combat areas. Thankfully, there are spots in a few stages that allow players to respawn critical upgrades. This area in Stage 1, for example, is relatively quick and easy and should allow for a level 8 gun in a very reasonable time frame. As an aside, if Jason or the Sophia takes damage in the side-scrolling sections, the gun power will not be reduced. On the topic of Jason's blaster, a very helpful technique is the ability to strafe in the combat areas. By pressing and holding the B button, Jason will continue to face in one direction regardless of where he moves on screen. Paired with a high-level gun, it can be easy to take on most of the game's foes without the fear of having to reposition for shots to land. This is especially helpful during boss encounters. Strafing cannot be used for grenade fire though. Blaster Master's general game flow is daunting. It will require several instances of backtracking, and its sometimes labyrinthian main areas can lead to an untimely death to those unfamiliar with the layout or ill-prepared for the trek. A map could really have helped in this regard, but being such an early Metroidvania-esque game, it's no surprise that one hasn't been implemented. It's all up to the player to memorize the best route to take, both with regards to the boss area and weapon enhancements. Death can happen pretty quickly in Blaster Master. Players have 3 lives per credit and will be placed at the beginning of the area they are in if they end up having to continue. But it goes further. It's not overtly stated, but players are limited to just 3 continues as well. Die too many times and the player is ejected right back to the title screen to start all over again. Classic NES hard. Its game design is still incredible for its age though. In specific, enemies don't just respawn if their starting positions go slightly off screen. In fact, entire areas can be cleared out and remain safe if backtracking in either a combat or exploration setting is required. There are limits to this, of course, but what's here is still very impressive. There will be times where enemies can clip out of the game though, sometimes permanently, others making them suddenly reappear resulting in a cheap hit. It's to be expected of such a complex game, and while it's frustrating, it happens far less than players might expect. Sprite size and detail is also pretty impressive, though this and the sprite population can also lead to slowdown, but of course this isn't anything that can't be overcome. Blaster Master controls superbly, allowing for a smooth experience for the most part. That is, until the Sophia's final module is installed. The Wall 2 module takes what was excellent control around back to a deserted alley on the outskirts of town and unceremoniously shoots it square in the face. With no inputs to engage or disengage the wall grip, the Sophia will just hug every surface it's on, swinging around to the undersides of floors and platforms when a jump was required instead. Especially when a jump is required, and when that jump is attempted, this will make the Sophia drop, which will almost always spell disaster, especially in areas 7 and 8. And this piece is required to progress to the end of the game. Never mind that Area 8 is the most challenging, damaging, spiteful portion of the entire journey. Forget the constant barrage of enemies, that's easy enough to overcome. It's hugging the ground into a pit of super death spikes when all we wanted to do was jump, which is some extreme bullshit. But that's not all. When players want to stick to a wall or platform, they'll just arbitrarily nod at times, which typically results in a quick death due to falling into hazards. And it's such a shame too, because the control scheme is actually super smooth and intuitive until the wall climbing is added to the mix. It's a real downer, and while it can be overcome to a minor degree of success, we never felt especially comfortable in doing so. There was always that sense of dread and a period of hesitation with every jump, especially where quick precision was required, particularly in, you guessed it, Area 8. In the end though, these hazardous areas are relatively brief so long as the player knows where to go and so long as they have a healthy stock of homing missiles and a full hover gauge. Thankfully, the on-foot segments are generally good throughout the game, which of course works very well for the final encounter. We can't really be that bitter when all is said and done though. This is an awesome 8-bit game, and for the most part it holds up today, to the point that the latest Blaster Master titles actually apply the original's formula almost exactly. But that's a story for another episode. Wink, wink. As far as 8-bit games on the NES go, few outside of Nintendo, Capcom, or Konami stick out or hold up like Blaster Master still does to us. In terms of its story, Blaster Master differs greatly from Metafight, but it's charming in its plot. Jason's frog, Fred, has escaped. And what's in Jason's backyard? A big-ass radioactive crate for no other reason than it's there. Upon contact with the crate, Fred mutates and escapes down a significant hole. Following Fred, Jason discovers the Sophia and gears up for the journey ahead. Yeah, that's all I need to know. Let's blast like a master. Visually, Blaster Master does great things for being a title from 1988. Varied, often colorful backgrounds, a wide variety of enemy types, and some gigantic boss sprites make this a visually rich title, with relatively little flicker. However, slowdown will often occur, especially with a fully powered gun, and doubly so combined with a particularly busy boss. Yet, it never feels unplayable as a result. Jason's sprite also has a ton of personality regardless of the viewpoint. His tiny sprite in the side-scrolling mode has a variety of poses and actions, including this little crawl here. But in combat, he's super detailed, complete with his slight asymmetrical shot placement. It's little details like that, right? Speaking of asymmetry, we generally like how the Sophia's wheels aren't in the same position as each other. Even in the story scenes and the status subscreen, they're never lined up. It's actually pretty satisfying. So it definitely looks pretty good for its age, but even better than that is Blaster Master's iconic sound. Sunsoft is very well known for its mastery over Nintendo's audio hardware. And you gotta admit, the Area 1 theme sets the stage with perhaps the best opening BGM track in any NES game. For anyone that has yet to hear it, it'll get you pumped up. But for everyone else who's heard it before, it elicits a guaranteed hell yes. Just about every track in this game is actually super solid, fitting the themes of each stage they represent rather well. The only exception, we'd say, is Area 7. But while it's not our favorite, it's far from not being good. And that's not bad at all. The sound effects, though, they can get a little grating. The sound played for these little worms can get pretty aggravating when players get hit over and over again. And hitting the armored sections of bosses can cause a shrill, constant cacophony. It can actually get so extreme, we would often trip a glitch in the sound address, resulting in the boss theme giving way to a completely unrelated BGM track. Still, on the whole, Blaster Master sounds as good as it looks and plays, which makes for a great overall package. So, how does Blaster Master stack up? Let's take a look. Blaster Master's control is truly excellent given the limitations of the NES pad. That is, until Wall 2 is installed, then it gets real crappy real fast. Thankfully, the time required to endure it is relatively brief. With limited continues, players that don't know their way through Blaster Master's crazy 8 areas will find the game to be brutally challenging. With practice and a good sense of direction, though, it is definitely manageable. A typical playthrough can last a decent amount of time depending on the routes players take through the game and whether they die or continue. Just learning each area will take a decent amount of time and dedication as well. Blaster Master's visuals are not only impressive, but also drip with personality and slowdown. With some of the most iconic NES music of all time, Blaster Master sounds incredible as well. Well, except for the super annoying armor hits on bosses with a full-powered gun. For its age, Blaster Master was innovative as hell, and its design elements are applied almost one-to-one along with quality of life improvements in the series' modern installments. Blaster Master can often be found for less than $10, giving it a great value for its price. It was gratifying to finally see the end of this one, not only because it had been so long, but because it didn't feel right going into the newest entries in the series without having conquered this one first. The original Blaster Master may be deeply flawed at the very end of what is otherwise an excellent, classic, iconic 8-bit game, but that can't keep us from loving it just as much today as we did all those years ago. Its sequels have largely not been especially great until very recently though, making this the high point of the classic line of games, and that's fine by us. Blaster Master gets a 4.75 out of 5. you should be able to get a copy of Blaster Master for very little money at auction today. Y'all can call me Ahab because I finally did it. Not only did I beat Blaster Master, I did it in 1 credit, losing just 1 life in the process. But now it's on to another game that I played quite a bit as a child, but never actually finished. But this time I'm also going to fire up its Japanese counterpart. Air Fortress is coming up in the next episode of Bullet Heaven. See you all in episode 303.